There is a strange feeling many people carry but cannot name, a quiet restlessness, a sense that life is happening, but not to them. That feeling is not confusion, it is a message. Somewhere within you lives another self, not imaginary, not mystical, but real in the deepest psychological sense. It is the you that would exist if you had spoken when you stayed silent, if you had acted when you hesitated, if you had chosen growth over comfort. That self is calling you now. There is a part of you that has never been invited to speak, not because it has nothing to say, but because what it carries feels inconvenient, unsettling, and at times frightening. This part does not announce itself loudly. It does not knock on the door in moments of success or comfort. It waits, it observes. And when it finally speaks, it often does so through unease. You feel it when life looks stable, yet something feels wrong. When everything appears acceptable on the surface, but inside there is tension, like a held breath that never releases. That tension is not weakness. It is not ingratitude. It is the pressure created when something essential within you has been pushed out of awareness for too long. This ignored part of you is not malicious. It is unfinished. It contains qualities you were once told were too much, too risky, too disruptive, or too unrealistic. Perhaps it holds your anger, because anger was labeled dangerous. Perhaps it holds your ambition, because ambition threatened the expectations placed upon you. Perhaps it holds your sensitivity, your creativity, your authority, your refusal to conform. None of these traits vanished. They were merely exiled. And what is exiled does not die. It waits in the dark, growing more intense the longer it is denied. This is why discomfort increases when ignored. This is why dissatisfaction deepens when avoided. The psyche does not punish you out of cruelty. It signals imbalance. You may try to reason your way out of this feeling. You may tell yourself that others have it worse, that you should be content, that this restlessness is childish or selfish. But the deeper self does not respond to logic. It responds to recognition. When unseen, it finds another way to be noticed. It speaks through irritation at small things, through envy that surprises you, through a sense of being trapped by a life you once chose. It may even speak through exhaustion, because carrying an unexpressed self requires constant energy. This is not coincidence. This is communication. Many people spend their lives running from this invitation. They distract themselves. They stay busy. They numb themselves with noise, routine, and constant motion. But silence always returns, and when it does, the ignored self steps forward again, asking the same question in a different voice. Why have you abandoned me? This question is uncomfortable because it demands honesty. It demands that you admit that safety was sometimes chosen over truth, approval over authenticity, predictability over meaning. And yet, this admission is not a condemnation. It is the beginning of integration. The ignored self does not want to destroy your life. It wants to complete it. It does not ask you to become reckless. It asks you to become whole. When you reject parts of yourself, you live partially. When you reclaim them, you gain depth. You may fear that acknowledging this shadow will overwhelm you, that it will turn you into someone you do not recognize. But suppression gives it power. Awareness gives you choice. What is unconscious controls you. What is conscious can be shaped. This is why the invitation feels urgent, not because time is running out in a dramatic sense, but because the longer you refuse this meeting, the louder the symptoms become. The psyche escalates when ignored, not out of hostility, but out of necessity. Listen carefully to what disturbs you. It is not random. It points directly to what you have disowned. The irritation you feel toward others often reveals traits you have denied in yourself. The fear you feel towards certain paths often guards the very potential you need to confront. To turn away from this invitation is easy. To accept it requires courage of a quiet kind. The courage to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to fix it. The courage to ask not, how do I get rid of this feeling, but what is this feeling trying to show me? When you allow the ignored self to speak, it does not arrive as chaos. It arrives as clarity. You begin to see patterns in your choices, repetitions in your struggles, themes in your dreams and longings. And slowly, what once felt like a threat reveals itself as guidance. This is the paradox. The part of you that frightens you most often carries the energy you need to grow. What you avoid becomes fate. What you face becomes strength. And the invitation will keep coming until you answer it. There is another version of you already alive in the background of your mind. Not a fantasy, not a wishful illusion, but a psychological reality shaped by every choice you hesitated to make. This version of you is built from the roads you noticed and quietly avoided. Each time you stood at a threshold and turned back, something in you continued forward without you. You sense this parallel self in moments that arrive unexpectedly. When you see someone living boldly and feel a sharp mixture of admiration and discomfort. When a certain idea returns again and again, refusing to be dismissed. When you imagine an alternate life and feel grief rather than curiosity. These reactions are not random, they are recognitions. This parallel self is not superior to you, nor is it judging you. It simply exists as a psychological counterweight, holding the potential energy of what might have been developed had different decisions been made. It is constructed from the same raw materials as your present self, but arranged through courage instead of caution. Many people believe regret is about the past. It is not. Regret is about the present meeting an unlived future. When the life you are living comes into contact with the life you could be living, friction occurs. That friction is felt as restlessness, sadness, or an unshakable sense that something essential is missing. This parallel self does not haunt you to torment you. It calls to you to be integrated. The psyche naturally seeks balance. When one side of you dominates, when order becomes rigid, when responsibility becomes resignation, the neglected side gathers strength. It waits for an opening. You may wonder why this other self feels so vivid, so persistent. It is because potential does not fade quietly. It demands expression. Energy that is not used turns inward and becomes tension. Over time, that tension can harden into self-criticism, bitterness, or an inexplicable fatigue with life itself. You may try to explain this feeling away. You may say this is just imagination, or it's too late now, or that path was unrealistic. But notice how the feeling returns, unchanged by explanation. That is because it is not an argument. It is a summons. The parallel self represents qualities you already possess, but have not allowed to shape your identity. Strength you have not claimed. Independence you have postponed. Creativity you have disciplined into silence. It is not asking you to abandon who you are, it is asking you to expand. This is where fear enters. To acknowledge this other self means accepting responsibility for your own becoming. It means admitting that some limitati ons were chosen, not imposed. And this realization can be unsettling, because it removes the comfort of blame. But with that discomfort comes power. If choice played a role in narrowing your life, choice can also widen it. The parallel self is not trapped in the past. It exists in the present as a direction, not a destination. You do not need to become that version completely. Integration does not require replacement. It requires dialogue. The goal is not to discard your current life, but to allow the qualities you left behind to return in conscious form. When you ignore this call, it does not disappear. It shows up indirectly. You may find yourself sabotaging opportunities that would bring growth. You may feel inexplicably resistant to success. You may remain loyal to a version of yourself that no longer fits, simply because it feels familiar. This is the psyche protecting itself from stagnation. What feels like inner conflict is often an attempt at correction. To meet your parallel self is not a dramatic confrontation. It is a series of small recognitions. You notice where you feel most alive. You pay attention to what consistently draws your attention. You listen to the envy that points, not to what others have, but to what you want to become. The tragedy is not that this other self exists. The tragedy is pretending you do not hear it. Over time, the distance between you and that self becomes a quiet sorrow, a sense of having missed something without knowing exactly what it was. But that distance can still be crossed. The parallel self is not ahead of you in time. It is beside you in possibility, and it is waiting for you to step toward it. There is a price paid for the life you do not live, and it is rarely demanded all at once. It is collected quietly, over years, in moments so small they seem insignificant. A choice postponed here, a truth softened there, a désir dismissed as impractical. Nothing dramatic appears to happen, and that is precisely why the cost goes unnoticed. Most people believe fate arrives from the outside, as circumstance, as misfortune, as bad luck. But very often what is called fate is simply the accumulation of what was avoided. When an inner calling is repeatedly ignored, it does not vanish. It changes form. It returns not as opportunity, but as limitation. You may recognize this cost as a dull dissatisfaction that follows you even when things are going well, or as a bitterness that surprises you, especially toward those who dare to live differently, or as a weariness that no amount of rest seems to cure. These are not signs of failure, they are signs of something essential being left behind. An unlived life does not remain neutral, it presses inward. What could have been expressed outwardly turns against the self. Energy that was meant for growth becomes tension. Tension becomes frustration. Frustration, left unattended, becomes resentment or despair. This is not punishment, it is consequence. When you repeatedly deny parts of yourself, you create an inner split. On one side stands the life you are living, shaped by habit, obligation, and expectation. On the other stands the life that asked for courage and was refused. The wider this gap grows, the more strain is placed on the psyche to hold it together. Many people attempt to compensate for this strain externally. They pursue status, approval, possessions, or constant stimulation. They hope that filling life with more will quiet the sense that something vital is missing. But excess cannot replace meaning. Distraction cannot substitute for alignment. Eventually, the unlived life begins to assert itself in ways that feel beyond your control. Patterns repeat. Relationships fracture in familiar ways. Opportunities dissolve at the last moment. You may feel as though something is working against you, when in truth, something within you is demanding acknowledgement. What is not lived consciously is lived unconsciously, and what is lived unconsciously often appears as fate. This is why people sometimes feel trapped in lives they themselves helped build. The structure is solid, the routine established, the identity reinforced. Yet inside, there is a quiet mourning, not for something lost, but for something never allowed to begin. This mourning often goes unnamed. Society does not teach people how to grieve unrealized potential. There are rituals for death, but none for the slow disappearance of possibility. And so the grief is carried silently, leaking out through irritability, numbness, or a vague sense of emptiness. But emptiness is not a void. It is a space where something should have grown. You may believe it is too late, that the cost has already been paid, that the path forward is closed. But the psyche does not measure time as the mind does. It measures readiness. The moment you become conscious of what has been neglected, the dynamic begins to shift. Awareness alone does not erase the cost, but it transforms it. Regret, when understood, becomes information. It points not backward, but inward. It asks you to see where life has narrowed and invites you to widen it again, even if only slightly. The unlived life does not demand perfection. It does not insist that you reclaim every lost opportunity. It asks for sincerity. It asks that you stop pretending you do not know what matters to you. It asks that you take responsibility not only for what you have done, but for what you have avoided. This responsibility can feel heavy at first because it removes comforting illusions, but it also restores dignity. To recognize your role in your own limitation is to rediscover your role in your own transformation. The cost of the unlived life is highest when it remains unconscious. Once seen, it becomes negotiable. You may not be able to live everything you once imagined, but you can live something more truthful than before. And that shift, however small it begins, is enough to change the direction of your fate. Imagine standing at the threshold of your own existence, feeling the subtle tug of something beyond the visible world, a presence that seems both familiar and mysterious. This is not a call to the ordinary senses, but to the hidden layers of your being, where your parallel self resides, an echo of who you could be, a reflection of untapped potential. Many spend their lives ignoring this call, swept along by routines, obligations, and the fear of the unknown. But the soul is persistent. It whispers, nudges, and when ignored for too long, it grows insistent, until we can no longer deny its presence. Your parallel self is not an illusion. It is a living possibility, a part of you that waits patiently for recognition. To heed this call requires courage, the courage to look within, to face the parts of yourself that you have hidden away, and to step into a realm where your life can expand in ways you have scarcely imagined. Consider the notion of time as more than a sequence of moments measured by clocks. Time is the medium through which the self unfolds, and yet, so often, we live as if it were a rigid, unyielding structure, failing to recognize the fluidity inherent in our being. Your parallel self is a dimension of this time, a version of you that has learned to embrace life in its fullest expression. It is the self that did not shrink in the face of fear, that did not conform to expectation, that did not suppress desire or creativity. And it is this self that calls to you now, not in abstract terms, but through the quiet urgencies of your heart, through the recurring dreams, the sudden inspirations, and the moments of longing that catch you unawares. To answer this call is to enter into a dialogue with a deeper truth, to bridge the chasm between who you are and who you are capable of becoming. There is a subtle but profound difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is passive, listening is active, requiring presence, attention, and an openness that many of us have forgotten. Your parallel self speaks in symbols, in images, in feelings that cannot always be captured in words. It communicates through the rhythms of your life, the patterns of your behavior, the coincidences that seem too pointed to be mere chance. To listen is to cultivate a sensitivity to these signals, to honor the moments of insight that arrive unexpectedly, and to trust in the wisdom that rises from within. There is no need for grand gestures or dramatic acts. Often, it is in the quiet recognition of your own potential that the deepest transformation begins. Many are afraid of transformation, equating it with loss or upheaval. Yet true change is not destruction, but revelation. Your parallel self embodies the aspects of you that are waiting to be acknowledged, the talents, virtues, and strengths that have been dormant. These elements are not strangers. They are pieces of a puzzle you have carried within all along. The call is an invitation, not a threat. It beckons you to explore, to experiment, to take steps, sometimes small, sometimes bold, toward a life that resonates more fully with the essence of who you are. When you resist, life often confronts you with obstacles, discomforts, and tensions, as if to remind you that growth cannot be postponed indefinitely. The resistance is part of the process, a mirror reflecting the fear of facing yourself, the fear of realizing that you are more than the version you currently inhabit. Integration is the culmination of this journey, the point where awareness meets action. To integrate the message of your parallel self is to weave the insights, the inspirations, and the courage you have summoned into the fabric of your daily life. It is to live consciously, to make choices that reflect a deeper understanding of your own potential, and to recognize that every act of self-realization ripples outward, touching others and the world around you. There is no final destination in this journey, only an ongoing unfolding, a dynamic interplay between what is and what could be. And in each moment that you respond to the call, that you act in alignment with your deeper self, you affirm the truth that your life is not merely a sequence of events, but a canvas upon which you are invited to create with intention and awareness. So, listen. Pay attention to the quiet urgencies within. Notice the patterns, the dreams, the persistent nudges that arise without explanation. Do not allow fear, distraction, or doubt to silence the voice that has been waiting for your recognition. Your parallel self is calling, not as a distant echo, but as an intimate companion on the path of your becoming. To answer now is to step into the fullness of your life, to embrace the reality of your own potential, and to honor the timeless dialogue between what is and what can be. The moment to respond is not tomorrow, it is now. There is a dimension of ourselves that we often neglect, a realm that exists alongside the familiar face we present to the world. It is not an imagined construct or a fleeting fantasy. It is a living, breathing possibility. This parallel self is a reflection of what we might become if we dared to step beyond the familiar patterns that confine us. Too often we walk through life in a haze of obligation, habit, and expectation, unaware that a call is quietly emanating from the depths of our being. It is a call that asks for attention, that demands a reckoning with the parts of ourselves we have neglected or suppressed. To ignore it is to settle for a life half-lived, to defer the unfolding of our own potential indefinitely. Your parallel self does not appear in grand, ostentatious gestures. It whispers in moments of quiet reflection, in the fleeting surge of inspiration that arrives without warning, in the persistent yearning that the mind struggles to articulate. These are not accidents or random impulses. They are the language of possibility speaking through you. There is a subtle urgency embedded in this call, a reminder that time is not infinite and that the opportunities for growth and transformation are finite. Each moment that passes without heed is a moment in which the parallel self retreats, not forever, but with the patience of one who waits for recognition. Life itself conspires to provide these invitations, yet so many pass them by, mistaking them for distraction, whim, or fear-driven avoidance. To answer this call requires courage of a peculiar kind, the courage to confront the shadow of oneself. The shadow is not a symbol of weakness or failure, but a repository of truths that we have denied. Within it lie fears, regrets, unacknowledged talents, and unfulfilled desires. Your parallel self inhabits the same terrain, waiting for reconciliation, waiting for acknowledgement. When we refuse to see the shadow, we live in halves, fragmenting our existence into what is visible and what is hidden. Integration, however, begins with recognition. It begins with an honest gaze into the unlit corners of the self and the decision to bring them into conscious awareness. In doing so, we open a channel through which the parallel self can step into our lived reality, enriching our choices, deepening our experiences, and expanding the horizon of what is possible. It is natural to fear this echo. Unter. Fear whispers that the unknown holds danger, that venturing beyond familiar patterns will lead to discomfort or failure. Yet, the very essence of the parallel self is that it embodies courage and wisdom born from experiences we have not yet allowed ourselves to live. It represents a life in which authenticity is not compromised, where creativity is not stifled, and where potential is actualized. To respond is to step beyond fear, not by denying it, but by acknowledging it and moving forward regardless. The journey is rarely smooth. It demands patience, reflection, and the willingness to act even when certainty is absent. But the reward is profound. A life aligned with the deepest currents of your being, a life that resonates with both purpose and possibility. Consider how often we live as if our paths are predetermined, constrained by circumstance, habit, and the expectations of others. Yet, each of us carries within a latent blueprint of possibility, a version of ourselves unbound by limitation, capable of choices that reflect true selfhood rather than mere survival. The call of your parallel self is an invitation to explore this blueprint, to experiment with the ways in which your life could be richer, more authentic, more vibrant. It is not an abstract or distant concept. It is here, now, waiting for your recognition. It manifests in curiosity, in sudden insights, in the persistent stirrings of ambition and desire that we might have long dismissed as impractical or unrealistic. These stirrings are not trivial. They are the voice of the self that has always known its own potential. Listening to this call is not a passive act. It demands engagement, reflection, and the courage to act. Small steps are often the most significant, for they establish a rhythm of attention and intentionality that the soul recognizes and responds to. By heeding the subtlest signals, ideas that ignite your imagination, the values that stir your conscience, the impulses toward creativity and connection, you cultivate a dialogue with the parallel self, a dialogue that strengthens over time and brings clarity to choices that once seemed uncertain. Each act of recognition, no matter how small, affirms that your life is not predetermined by inertia or circumstance, but is instead a co-creation between the self that exists and the self that calls. Ultimately, the call of your parallel self is a summons to wholeness. It asks you to reconcile the visible with the invisible, the lived with the potential, the ordinary with the extraordinary. It challenges the complacency that numbs our awareness and beckons toward a life lived with depth, authenticity, and courage. When you answer, you step into a reality in which your actions are guided not merely by external demands or habitual patterns, but by a profound alignment with the truest aspects of yourself. The moment to respond is not some distant point in the future. It is here, it is now, and it carries the promise of transformation beyond what you have yet imagined. The call is clear, the opportunity real, and the time is now.